What's up, yo? Welcome to Your One Life. I'm your host, Kim Young Kim, and I'm super glad to have you as a listener today. If you're new here, here's what this podcast is all about. This podcast is about teaching you from the greatest minds in the world, assisting you in all aspects of your life, and helping you beat the summer heat by freezing your eggs. You gotta hard boil and peel them first, though. Then you can put them in your pockets, and it's an instant cooling of the thighs, which is where most of your body heat lives. And when they're eventually thawed, you got a protein snack on the go. Hashtag life hack. All right, so first things first, I want you to know that I'm going through a name change. Yep, that's right. I'm changing my name from Kim Young Kim to Handsome and Humble. That way, when I introduce myself to people, I can tell them I'm handsome and humble. And if you're wondering what the N stands for, it stands for not. Now, you're probably asking yourself, why is he doing this? Here's why. Because honesty is the best policy. And if you don't agree, ask any politician, and they'll tell you the same thing. But real talk, I am working on a name change, but it's not my personal name that I'm changing, but the name of this podcast. The reason why is it's just not resonating or working like it should. Now, I didn't come to this conclusion on my own, but once it was pointed out, I totally agree and see the need for the change. Now, my previous podcast, Young Legends, had the perfect name, but this one is one that I actually settled for because I had to get the show on the road, and Your One Life is the best that I could come up with at the time. So I don't know what my new name will be, but I do have a few contenders. And if you have an idea for a show name, I'd love to hear it. You can send your ideas to me via email at youronelifepodcast@gmail.com or on Instagram at youronelifepodcast. And one is spelled WON. Now, both of these will be linked in the show notes. And if I end up picking the name you sent in return, I will name my first 8 children after you. Now, today's episode is inspired by the last episode I dropped because I came to realize that as I was telling you to go out and talk to new people, I wasn't equipping you enough with the tools to do so. Now, I've heard a lot of people say that they don't like small talk, but no relationship builds without some small talk. There's a story from back in the day where LeBron James randomly met his current manager, Rich Paul, at the airport. And the way it all started is LeBron asked Rich Paul about the throwback football jersey that Rich Paul was wearing. And fast forward 20 years later, Rich Paul goes from a 21-year-old dude hustling jerseys out of the trunk of his car to being the CEO of Clutch Sports with a net worth of $120 million and marrying Adele. Now, that's such a great story, and this is how human relationships go down. You already know that you met some of your best friends, your significant other, and maybe even a business partner from a seemingly inconsequential conversation. And since conversations can change your life, it's time we focus on how to do them well. So I got a lot of my info from a couple books, one of them called How to Talk to Anyone by Leo Lowndes and Conversationally Speaking by Alan Garner, along with an article in the Harvard Business Review, a video from the Harvard Business Review, and a video from Jim Quick, all of which will be linked in the show notes. Now, one thing we need to focus on is having good body language. And that's a whole episode on its own, so I won't delve too much into it. But one thing that Leo said is keep it open. Now, you may have already heard this, but you also may need this reminder. When talking to people, don't cross your arms across your chest, and don't cross your fingers over each other to form a cross and hold it out toward people like they're vampires, even if they are vampires. That's just bad manners. Another thing Leo says is, when you're interacting with someone, make eye contact first, then smile. Which makes sense because your smiling after eye contact states, I see you, and I'm happy that I do. Whatever you do, don't look at their watch and then smile. Because if you do, you'll come off as a gold digger. And if this is something that you do, you most likely are one. By the way, there are plenty of male gold diggers out there nowadays. It's not just women. And side note, I had a therapist last year who was actually encouraging me to become a gold digger myself. And I was like, you know, this whole patient-therapist confidentiality doesn't work in reverse, right? Okay, another tip from her book about approaching people is give them their space. In America, 3 feet, maybe 4 feet is a good measurement. And you're probably wondering, how can I know what 4 feet is? Here's a little life hack. I walk around with a 4-foot-long party sub on a rolling cart everywhere I go. Not only are my measurements exact, but also this is a great way to make friends. Now, one thing I've noticed about approaching people is you got to make them feel like you're just passing by and there's a clear out for them. If they're sitting down and you sit down and start talking to them, or you put your stuff down by them and start talking to them, that is not the move, because then they feel trapped. Instead, what you got to do is you got to look like you're leaving at any given moment. How do you do this? Well, you can start lacing up your running shoes, you can stretch out your hammies, or keep looking over your shoulder like people are coming after you. All right, so now that we've covered body language, smiling, and giving people distance, here are a few tips as you talk to people. Both authors stated to be positive about yourself, and yes, that is the move. I remember being in a conversation with 2 people at an event, one who I knew and one I didn't know. And the one I didn't know had a facial abnormality, and I won't say what it is, but it was something that was quite prominent. Now, everything was going just fine. There was no need for this person to draw attention to it or say anything about it, but they did. And once they did, it changed the energy of the conversation. It made things super uncomfortable for my acquaintance and myself. So much for me that I had to excuse myself out of the conversation. So don't denigrate yourself in conversation. If you're overweight or short or in a straitjacket, there's no need to mention this. There's no need to draw attention to it. And doing so will ruin the mood. A friend of mine who's visually impaired once told me, when he's cool about his blindness, it puts other people at ease too. So remember that next time you meet a new friend. Hannibal Lecter. All right, so I got some great tips from Jim Quick, the king of remembering things, for this next section. So when you talk to people, one good practice is to learn their names. And experts say that it's good to offer your name first and then ask for theirs. And when I ask for their names, I also ask for the last 8 digits of their social security number, and then I repeat it back to them so I can try to remember both. The tricky thing about names, though, is it's easy to forget someone's name as you're taking in a lot through your ears and your eyes when talking to them, particularly if they're handsome and humble. So one trick is to spell their name back to them or ask them how to spell it. For example, you can say, is that John with an H or without one? Also, you can do visualizations to help you remember their name. For example, if you meet someone named Lisa, in your mind, you can superimpose their head onto Lisa Simpson's body. Or if someone is named Bill, you can picture them handing you a bill. If their name is Gertrude, you can imagine yourself leaving the conversation because, well, why are you talking to someone named Gertrude? What are you, a funeral director? Now, the 2 most basic questions people use in getting to know each other, I'll cover later in the episode. But one I find myself using that's kind of basic is, what do you do for fun? Now, on the surface, that seems like a great question because who doesn't like fun? But sometimes it doesn't work when you first meet someone for a few possible reasons. One being, they're not fun people. I've literally had people tell me, I'm pretty boring actually. But beyond that, some people don't want to disclose too much information to a stranger, and essentially, that's what you are, at first at least. Also, some people are embarrassed about what they do for fun, as they've been teased by their friends for spending their free time administering vigilante justice, at least until they end up saving one of these said friends. By the way, you're welcome, Michael. But this question of what do you do for fun doesn't always work because it's a closed-ended question which actually work best when you follow them with an open-ended question. So one good thing Alan Gardner says is to ask open-ended questions. For example, let's say you see someone wearing a Colorado Rockies shirt. Instead of asking them if they're from Colorado, what you could say is, how do you think this season will go? Or let's say you meet someone decked out in a certain type of gear. And by the way, if they're geared up from head to toe in something, there's a good chance they'll want to talk about it. So let's say you come across someone in a tennis outfit. You can say to them, I've been thinking about starting to play for a while now. In what ways will tennis benefit my life? Now, back to the two most basic questions that are used. I think the number one go-to is, what do you do? Now, when someone asks you this question, you are in complete control of how you answer. I oftentimes tell them about my passion project, being my podcast, because I'm trying to get more people to like and subscribe. Hint, hint. And then they always ask what my podcast is about. And one of my go-to answers is not snitching. And I say that just to put a smile on their face and then tell them about my podcast and get them interested in it and show them I got a sense of humor and so on and so forth. Now, when I tell people I'm a teacher, it's a perfectly predictable line of questions that I get after I tell them I teach. It's always the same two follow-up questions. What subject do you teach and where do you teach? And it's so boring of a conversation, but I realize now that I'm part of the problem. So I need to give them more fun answers to work with. And I used to do this years ago when people hit me up with that first follow-up question, what do you teach? Because my response was racism. Now, that's a really funny joke to me because racism is taught and learned. That's why it works. But it's also an edgy joke, and some people don't understand that I'm joking. And since it's 2025 and everyone's looking to get offended, I decided to retire this joke because what it does is it affects my ability to have a positive impact on people's lives. And instead, I came up with a new response that's safe and works really well, but only when I use it. But anyhow, come up with something that's fun for your line of work to keep the conversation light and jovial. For example, if you're a hairdresser, you can say, I cut people. Or if you're an interior designer, you can say, I infiltrate people's houses and turn them into homes. One great tip from Lael's book is she said, learn interesting facts about your profession to keep the conversation moving. For example, if you're a librarian, find out how many library books get checked out nationwide every year. Now, why are you doing this? To keep the conversation moving and to keep the conversation fun. Also, get creative with your introduction. This is just a me thing, but it irks me when people go for low-hanging fruit. This happens far too often. For example, so many pharmacists have in their social media profiles, legal drug dealer. And I apologize if this is you, but it's been done. Try something new like, I'm a pill pusher, or I got the skills to push the pills. Try something more creative. That's going to get people to react to you and want to interact with you more. Also, Lael says in her book, direct your answers toward the conversation you want to have. So, for example, let's say you're a software engineer and you worked on the initiative to develop AI girlfriends and you want people to know that for some reason. Say that as part of your answer. Now, this does require some thinking ahead, but that's what you have to do for your conversations to go the way you want them to. One thing about the question, what do you do, is it creates a situation where people are sizing you up and vice versa, and it creates this weird energy between you and the other person. So I'm not saying that it shouldn't come up, but the way it should come up, in my opinion, is it should come up organically. Not as a direct question, but something that you get to eventually in the conversation, unless you're at a networking event or some other event that requires you to learn what people do from the jump. Now, the second most basic question is, where are you from? I use this one sometimes, but the way I do it is I ask them how long they've been in Atlanta or how long they've been in whatever city that they're in versus where they're from, and I'll explain more about that later. But again, what I've come to realize is I don't play enough defense on this question. When people ask me where I'm from, I often find myself answering, I'm from Atlanta. I moved to LA for 6 years, and then I moved back. And that's just so boring, honestly. Now that I think about it, I'm just like, man, this is such a boring answer. Leo gives a great template to follow instead, and here it is. I'm from X. I moved to Y because of Z. So here's my new answer. I'm from Atlanta and moved to LA because I was looking for adventure. And in reverse, I can say I lived in LA and I moved back to Atlanta because of outstanding warrants. But even with this question, the way you answer it can guide your conversation, so answer with intention. And you can guide it by moving it in the direction that you want to talk about. For example, you can say, I moved to Atlanta to pursue acting or the tech sector or to become a real housewife. And again, with the city that you're from, you can find super interesting things about your city and then include them in the conversation to keep it light, jovial, and to move it along. So anyhow, after finding out where someone moved from or how long they've been in your city, you can always ask an open-ended question like, what's your favorite thing about this city? Now, when you're meeting new people, it's always best to focus on the positive. Don't say something like, how do you like this traffic? Or how do you like our lack of public transportation? That is not the direction you want your conversation to go in. You need to focus on the positive. Now, regarding the where are you from question, this is not a great question. This is actually a bad question because sometimes it can be interpreted as, what's your ethnicity? And sometimes that is the intention of the question asker. And I personally like it when people ask me this question and I can tell that that's what they were going after because they look disappointed after I tell them I'm from Atlanta. And the reason why I like it is because it's an orange flag. It usually means that they're terrible conversationalists. And oftentimes I find myself needing to exit the conversation not long after it starts. So why is this a bad question and why should you not ask it? Well, like I said earlier, it's 2025 and people are highly sensitive and looking to be offended. But think about this for a second. Think about someone who's from Sudan or Iran or Ukraine. Do you think people from those countries want to talk about where they're from as war rages in their country? No, absolutely not. I remember last year I was riding a shuttle to the airport and one of the other passengers asked the driver where he's from because he had a really thick accent. And the driver answered that he's from Ukraine. Then the passenger asked when he came to America, and the driver responded that he came here about a year ago. So not only is he from a war-torn country that's under attack, but he's also not fighting for his country. And there's a lot of Ukrainian men in America and elsewhere not fighting for Ukraine. I'm sure a lot of these men have wife and kids, and it's a really tough decision to make and not something that I'm going to pass judgment on. But I felt so terrible for this guy, and I was so angry with that person who doesn't realize what a faux pas asking this question is in today's world. But I've done this myself. 10 years ago, I was talking to this white woman at a networking event, and she was as American as I am. And when she handed me her business card, she had an Eastern European last name, a super cool looking one actually, and it caught me off guard. And I just blurted out, "Oh my God, your name's so awesome. What country is that from?" And it turns out that she was from a country that experienced a terrible war in the 1990s, and her energy shifted immediately. And from her reaction, I would not be surprised one bit if she's a refugee. And in that moment, I just felt so terrible for drumming up possible bad memories for her. And that's not something I want you to experience. So don't ask people where they're from. There's just too much downside on that question and not enough upside. Okay, moving on. One thing I like to do is I like to keep the mood fun and positive when I first meet people, and I like to say ridiculous things. So I've gone up to people and I've said to them, "Hey, would you like to have an organic conversation with me?" Or, "Excuse me, are you an undercover cop?" Sometimes when I'm at a crosswalk and I'm waiting for a red light so I can cross, I turn to the person next to me and say, "Hey, are you here for the meetup?" Or if someone is nearby and they have a bike, I look at them and say, "Hey, are we going to race?" And the cool thing about saying something light and fun is if they're fun people, they'll vibe with it. And if they're not, you can always just run in the other direction. By the way, feel free to use any of these yourself, like your DJ Khaled. Now, another way to start conversations is to have something or to wear something that is a conversation starter, like Rich Paul and his throwback football jersey. What you want is you want something that gets people talking, asking you about it, so on and so forth. Because a lot of people want to talk to you, but they need an in so they don't feel like a weirdo, just like you don't want to feel like a weirdo when you go and approach people. Now, one thing I like to do is I like to wear stuff that resonates with me. So I'll wear shirts of causes that I support because what I want to do is I want to meet people who are like-minded and also support certain causes and support causes just in general. Well, maybe you don't like wearing cause shirts. That's perfectly fine. You can wear a Betty White shirt. You can wear some funky earrings. You can wear anything that gets people to say, hey, I like that thing you got on, or what's that, or whatever the case may be. Just last week, I saw a guy with a Kid Rock tattoo, and I actually wanted to go up and thank him for saving me the time of getting to know him. Another thing you can do is you can stay up with current events, particularly stuff happening in your city, but also stuff happening nationwide, because it does give you something to talk about with others. Just be careful. Like the motto of 2025 is be careful. But yeah, just be careful and mindful. And you probably already know that politics, religion, all of that, just don't talk to strangers about that unless you're trying to get them to go away. Now, the best thing to do when trying to interact with somebody is to use your environment. This is the best course of action because it's super neutral and it's spur of the moment and it doesn't put a focus on other people. So the environment could be many things. It could be this DJ is killing it right now. I love the vibe here, right? I mean, there's so many things in our environment to make note on, and that's what you got to do. Adam Garner in his book said when he was at an art museum, he would go up to different people and just ask them, hey, what do you think that the artist was trying to say in this painting? And it created so many conversations, and it was such a hit that he just kept doing it over and over and over. And this is something that you can do as well. Also, as you focus on your environment, again, don't focus on the negative unless you make a very harmful negative joke and you keep it light. For example, when I'm at a busy grocery store, I've said to people, hey, are we going to make it out alive? And stay strong, brother. Like, that is just fun. That is just playful. I'm making light of a situation that's a little annoying, but nothing majorly problematic. And, it's just a light joke. No big deal. If you're at an eatery, you can ask for recommendations. If you're at a coffee shop, which I oftentimes am, you can ask people what they're working on or what they're reading. You can make jokes of it. Recently, I said to a guy next to me, hey, do you mind if I read along with you? Can you just, turn the book my way so we can read together? And he laughed, and it was all just good fun. But work with what you have in front of you. That is the best way to go about it and the most neutral way versus asking them personal questions about themselves and so on and so forth. So when you have these conversational topics, yes, those usually turn into something more deep, but it's a good place to start right there on the surface, right there with what you're both experiencing. All right, so use your environment, talk about things on the walls, talk about the sounds, talk about the smells, particularly the smell of yourself, talk about things that are positive, and all of these very basic topics can open up deeper conversation, but these are a good and safe place to start. Now, another thing I love to do is I love to compliment people. And I said this in the last episode, but I'm going to say it again. Compliment people if they deserve your compliments. If someone's very stylish, oftentimes I'll go up to them and I'll say, I am hiring you as my stylist. And people love that. It's also good to follow up with a question like, where do you shop? Because that helps move the conversation along. Now, both authors say when you compliment someone, like you say, hey, I like your shoes, you also need to follow it up with a question or another comment like, where did you get them or something like that? Because what people oftentimes do is when you give them a compliment, many people, myself included, deflect the compliment, which doesn't create more conversation. So always have a follow-up comment or question to keep the conversation going and to stop them from saying, oh, these raggedy old things. That's not where you want the conversation to go. Also, when you compliment people, do not compliment their appearance, particularly their bodies. It is just weird and awkward. Don't do it with strangers. Maybe don't even do it with people you know unless you know them pretty well. It just creates a weird energy, and I'm not a fan, and most people I've come across also aren't. And honestly, the next time someone says to me, what do you do to stay in shape? I'm going to respond, Ozempic. And I'm not saying that this happens often, but when it happens, I just don't know how to respond. And it does not move the conversation into much of a conversation after that. Now, the one time you can compliment their body is when they're broadcasting it. For example, if they're wearing a shirt that says, I'm not perfect, but my pecs are, or Tyrannosaurus pecs, yeah, maybe at that point you can give them a compliment on their sweet pectorals, but you can also give them a compliment on their sweet t-shirt game. And when it comes to receiving compliments, don't return the same compliment towards others. I can't remember which author said this, but it feels forced and contrived, and it's not a good look. And I've done this myself when someone has come up to me and said, hey, that's a nice jacket. And I respond to them, thanks, I like your jacket too. And 9 times out of 10, they're not even wearing a jacket. And as you compliment people, make sure that you're specific about what it is you're complimenting them on, particularly when they're wearing something. Like, oh my gosh, your outfit makes you look like a Bond villain. Now, if you're worried about people not receiving your compliment, one thing you can do is when you're complimenting them, you can also compliment yourself to take the pressure off of them. I've done this myself when I noticed a woman just got her hair did, and I just went up to her and I said, your hair reminds me of my personality. It's flawless. Now, that was an exaggeration about her hair, but it made her feel good and it made her laugh. All right, so when it comes to compliments, both authors say don't compliment people too much. That comes off as sycophantic, and that's not how you want to come off. So in order to make sure you don't do that, what you should do is you got to keep track of your compliments. You should mark down on a sheet of paper after each compliment you give them. And if they look at you and they ask you what you're doing, just tell them. People love honesty and they love learning about people skills. Now, this is something I like to do, and I think it's funny. It's not from any book, but it makes me laugh, so I do it. What I do is I like to make ridiculous comments on people's appearance. So if a man is like very handsome, I will go up to him and I'll say, hey, has anyone told you that you look like Dr. Phil? And then I'll say, no, I'm just kidding. You don't. You're a good looking fella. But it always makes people laugh when you make this joke, as long as they're really good looking and you tell them you're joking right after. They love it. Now, I do that with other men. I haven't done it with women so much because oftentimes they think you're hitting on them. But I'm going to start doing this just for funsies to see how it goes. So the next time I see a really beautiful woman, I'm going to go up to her and say, hey, has anyone told you that you look like the devil? And then I'll follow it up with, you absolutely don't look like Satan at all. I was just curious if anyone ever told you that. I don't know how that's going to go, but I will report back when it goes down. And something tells me it's going to be a magical moment. All right, so when it comes to compliments, hit them with some follow-up questions. Don't return the same compliment to people. Be specific about the compliments that you're giving, and don't overdo it. Unless you're complimenting me, then definitely overdo it. All right, so we're getting close to the end of the episode, and this is a super easy one for starting a conversation for people who don't like going up to strangers and talking to them, which is to ask them for advice. And the reason why it's so easy is because decent people love helping other people, and that's who you want to meet. So if you're looking to get out of your shell, ask people for advice and ask people for advice/help. Here are a few examples. You can go up to someone and say, hey, I'm looking to travel somewhere really cool next month. What are some great places that you've been that are very underrated? Boom. They're going to come up with a bunch of different places for you to go check out. And you're having this conversation and it's all good positive vibes. Or you could go up to them and say, hey, what do you think of this as a new name for my podcast? Now, if you don't have a podcast, just create a fake podcast for this conversation. They'll never find out. Or another one you could do is, hey, my parents are visiting from out of town. What's a classy restaurant you'd recommend? All these are questions that people can answer, and also they create good vibes and good energy between you and them. But beyond that, they can lead into more conversation, and that might be something that you're aiming for. All right, one last tip. I actually heard a guy named Charles Duhigg, who's an author, talk about this from his book, Super Communicators. And what he said is, when you go to a networking event, keep a list of questions that you can ask in your back pocket when you go to this event. And the reason why you do this is it puts you at ease. And when you're at ease, it helps you to live more in the moment. And that's exactly what you need in order to converse with other people. All right, so go out there, talk to new people, implement some of the tools that you heard in this episode, and go out on a limb. Seriously, like this whole world is full of so many cool people that you're going to want to meet. And the way you're going to meet them is by striking up a conversation and practicing all the things that you heard in this episode. And yes, this is a skill, but because it is a skill, you can get better at it. You can practice it in your daily life. And if you do, your life will become better. And that's why you showed up and listened to this podcast, because you want your life to get better. So go out there, meet new people, practice these skills, and do what you can to grow, to make your life better, and to meet wonderful people on your journey. All right, if you're new here, don't forget to hit the follow button so you don't miss future episodes. If you've been listening to this podcast, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, leave a comment on Spotify, leave a comment on YouTube. All that helps with getting the word out and also getting better guests in the future and helping more people. Here's a recent review by Abby Majors. Great host, great podcast. The host is great. Dissecting personal stories and diving into book subjects, he navigates the space seamlessly. 10 out of 10 would recommend. Abby, I am so glad that you're listening to the podcast, and I'm glad you're getting a lot out of it, and thanks for the review. Now, if you leave a podcast review, your review may be read aloud in a future episode. All right, one last order of business, and I'm going to close it out. If you have a suggestion for a new name for the podcast, please reach out via email at Your One Life Podcast or on Instagram at Your One Life Podcast. And one is spelled WON. And again, those links will be in the show notes. And even if you don't have a name for the podcast, feel free to reach out. I love hearing from y'all. It absolutely makes my day. And I appreciate those of you who have. I want to give a shout out to my dude, Siraj Rhett, for making the instrumental for this podcast. And shout out to you for all the great things you're going to do with what you learned in today's episode. This is Your One Life. I'm Kim Young Kim. I hope you have a great day, a great week, and until next time, peace.